Similar to the other categories, sentient stands are a natural result of the rules behind the power system. But any stand can become sentient over time, like how despite stands having very distinct appearances, they can change over a decade. Or if you have some item that's its own distinct source of agency in your possession, so it's not a standard replaceable tool you can ignore, it has individual significance, but it does revolve around you by being in your toolkit, you can naturally shape your stand to incorporate it. Like Kira fitting Stray Cat in Killer Queen's chest, or presumably what Pulpo did with Diavolo's arrow. Because stands, even though they're very specific and tedious to use, are pretty flexible. The way a stand manifests is the result of what it symbolizes in any given moment. It's just hard for users to control what that is because it depends on the agency they have, and that's hard for someone to change. Most of the time, a stand looks and works the exact same, or is only adjusted in different edge cases to fit how their agency might be different in some kind of environment, during some kind of conflict, or with some affliction. They symbolize your agency and then continue to symbolize it even though they become a part of your agency. So in a vacuum, they imprint themselves, but that's not invincible. Over time, the other factors they rely on, like the user's mental state, can change. Or, if the user dies, a stand loses its foundation, so that symbolism falls apart and the ability stops working. If you were succeeding in some activity, in a stand conflict that cost you your life, your stand could still complete that action, but otherwise, that's it. But like the consistent appearance of stands, this itself is not a rule. It's a result of the wider rule, more or less, that they are symbolizing a source of agency moment to moment, and only holding themselves together because they become the dominant part of that agency. The reason stands stop working when their users pass away is because most of the time, the agency a stand symbolizes is the influence a person has. As a part of any environment, a human has physical power and a brain, which is like a super advanced homing function for their muscles, because of how it can get them to follow really sudden or intricate instructions to move their body. Unlike a boulder that might be blown around by the wind and start rolling down a hill, but otherwise on its own stands still, a human's own brain, their own mind, can get them to trample a bed of flowers that's been untouched since the dawn of time, or be the one to push that boulder to fall down a hill. When you program a video game or a simulation of an environment, individual rocks might blend into the terrain, but people are normally distinct objects with their own sprites and code. They have a higher ratio of logical chain reactions affecting the environment that center around them, enough to make you think that the logic of the game structure should consider them a separate object. That's what figurative weight, or gravity, means, and that's what agency is. Chain reactions bend around you because you're like a planet with your own gravitational pull that hijacks the trajectories of things when they get close. But because stands add agency, if you give something that's temporarily relevant a stand, and then that agency is enough to be able to keep itself existing on its own, then that thing can maintain a stand even if it's not human, alive, or intelligent itself. A tree could have a stand, or a bunch of trees. So if a person is pierced by an item that awakens a stand within them, but rather than having some relatively independent source of strength, their actions all revolve around something else, that's what their stand will symbolize, as the agency tied to them. When people refer to sentience in stands, there are 3 separate traits that are tied to each other, but technically separate because they mean different things, and so they have different criteria to unlock them. There's true sentience, where a stand has its own awareness and intelligence, which you can see in stands that communicate with people, like Cheap Trick and Dragon's Dream. There's independence, where a stand will indiscriminately attack their own user, or the concept of being the stand's user is a bit ambiguous, like Superfly, Cheap Trick, and Dragon's Dream. And there's lasting after the user disappears, like a curse, which we see in Milagro Man and Wonder of You, and Cheap Trick, and probably Superfly. Out of these 3 traits, true sentience is the easiest to achieve, and it's because stands are ultimately a supernatural power system. The idea of the natural or science is that you're able to recognize patterns in what happens in the world. So then, if you guess some sort of cause and effect relationship that makes those patterns keep happening, and then you set up a scenario where the same relationship would apply in a different environment, you can see if it lets you cause the same pattern. At its core, science is just what you'd call spotting consistent patterns in the world around you, guessing a chain reaction, and then setting up that different environment where you can see if your theory of cause and effect still works by using it to cause the same effect on command. Pattern recognition and guessing the formula behind it are all science is. So when something is supernatural, there's a consistent enough pattern that you can still recognize something is happening, but the source is so complex you can never consistently map out how. In other words, while you can only process something supernatural through the natural concepts and environments it affects, relative to the natural world, something supernatural can always seem to change its methods and the scientific rules it causes effects through. Even if it's possible to do, they're not worth breaking down as a science, because they're used competitively, and every moment you hesitate to think or try to understand the mechanisms, someone else can take you out. So you look for symbols, and beyond some threshold you treat the source of power like it's intelligent or alive, and stop trying to break it down like a science, because it's more effective to leave alone. Some observable amount of force, some tangible influence, is applied through methods so complex you can't tell what they are and have to treat them as mystical. Stands are conveyed to work this way. Some force in the universe has intelligence and symbolizes sources of agency to boost the power they have. And this is what lets any stand become sentient, because the mechanism behind stands might be capped at the amount of power they can add to a person's strength through symbolism. The way that strength manifests, the symbolism can be as intricate or complex as need be. This isn't Hunter x Hunter or JJK, where you need a computer like a brain to calculate all the instructions for a special technique to operate. Thanks to stands being truly supernatural, at least in every way they're conveyed, when a character's power is best symbolized by them moving any number of obstacles toward a target at once, their stand ability automatically lets them do that. It's a capped amount of force that the stand will exert on those targets, but the number of obstacles it uses to apply that force through can be endless at no stamina or calculation cost. So certain traits are easier to manifest through stand symbolism than others. And while power is the thing stands symbolize, complexity is the endless resource they're given to do so. So the one trait a stand can manifest that's basically a free feature at no cost whatsoever is sentience. It's not making a stand stronger, you're just making the avatar a bit more complex and intelligent. So sentience is given to a stand whenever the symbolism is appropriate, but at no extra cost, because it doesn't take anything to manifest. An automatic stand walking around on its own and following procedure doesn't count as sentient, because it's just a manifestation of orders. But sentience is just a way of dressing that up, when it fits the source of their automatic power. So someone like DNG, hiding their malice through a facade, would get an automatic stand that distracts opponents with its own personality, but it's still just a way of following that automatic stand's symbolic routine. Sentience is normally used to symbolize a source of power seeming like it's alive and has a mind of its own, but it doesn't accomplish anything extra. Kenzo resigns himself to the wider power of feng shui, Poco Loco relies on the wider power of having the best luck, and Anubis' creator seemed to pride themselves on creating this sword, this new creation that would last beyond them, so all those stands can talk to people like they have their own personalities. And sentience is such a free trait to have in a stand that when someone doesn't understand the power they're instinctively using yet, or they dissociate from it, a regular stand can be sentient for that period of time as well. Jotaro is very cautious but proactive and has terrible communication skills, so Star Platinum acts for him but doesn't talk at the start of Stardust Crusaders. Whereas Trish's power comes from giving life to societal structures in a different way from Giorno, by bringing back social bonds. So when she's using her power deep down, and her agency with it is unavoidably a factor in her conflicts, so she has to awaken it, but lacks the conviction to consciously wield it, Spice Girl can talk to her. And when Koichi, who easily gets overwhelmed and has to compartmentalize his productive mindsets because of how short-sighted he is, reaches a mental state where he can be empowered by aggressively attacking people, but starts acting reckless because of his short-sightedness, that act of Echoes sometimes talks on its own, like it's independently using its power, because Koichi's strength comes from having influence despite not possessing physical might. so his stand is about social power and communication. Sentience in a stand is an afterthought. It's a symptom of however the user's source of strength is symbolized, and it doesn't have a higher worthiness cost or any inherent benefits. While it's not the same trait of true sentience, some stands like Cheap Trick and Anubis also seem to act or exist independently and transfer from host to host after their users pass away. So far, this tends to be because their users' actions revolved around something else. So rather than symbolizing their own agency, their stands symbolize how they're at the mercy of some other idea. Cheap Trick doesn't gain extra power through being sentient. It's symbolizing how Kinoto's fear draws attention and aggravates people, so it can communicate to nearby creatures, but that could also be done through automatic attention grabbing. It's just that letting the stand talk makes the symbolism tighter, and it doesn't accomplish anything extra, so Cheap Trick is worth making sentient. He would go through hoops to keep people from seeing it, even if those actions made other people curious. So his stand is something that clings to him, antagonizes other people, and destroys him if he fails to avoid what he tries to. Then, because it attacks its user by getting somebody else to meet its condition, it has agency over that person and can pass to them. Awakening a stand stabilizes the concept a person like Kinoto revolves around. So even if they pass away, the stand can grab somebody else who meets the right conditions and continue to function. I wouldn't be surprised if even if Kinoto withered away naturally, looking at the back of his corpse would get somebody to fill that role for Cheap Trick's power and bring influence back to that stand. Overall, it's the same type of threat as Milagro Man, but because that source of power isn't about something tied to conveying a personality, it just moves around like an automatic stand and doesn't bother expressing one. And I also wouldn't be surprised if Superfly is another curse that can exist without the user, since it symbolizes their reliance on a place for themselves where the rest of society can't hurt them. The last person remaining in that territory can't leave, and the tower protects itself, so it might work like a Cheap Trick and continue to exist after the original user passes away. And if anyone enters the area when no one else is still alive within it, I'd imagine it would start working again. The same sort of idea explains Milagro Man. Someone influenced the world and passed away after being driven by earning money, missing out on life, and having it taken from them by that obsession. So now, people who take the Milagro Man's money earn more bills until they're crushed, in order of who's been able to have the curse spread to them most recently. And by reversing the transfer of money, by giving it back to whoever you got it from, the power's undone. Notorious B.I.G.'s user was a trope, an example of the ideal member for Passion or another of those types of criminal organizations, who would be fueled by their aggression and dedicate even their life to following orders. So their strength is that they can provide lasting accomplishments that benefit Passion after they pass away, and their activity revolves around the organization. So the stand is set free with the user's sacrifice to consume whatever he had placed himself near to target. Anubis' user successfully made their own creation, that sword, that was the source of their strength to have a stand, or at least became that strength. So even after their passing, Anubis could still exist within that weapon. And Wonder of You was just harnessing an external source of power and came from the advantages that had been benefiting Toru since birth. So even after his passing, those advantages were still things that existed in the world, and the stand could still exist. In summary, if the strength a person's stand symbolizes is something that exists without them, their stand doesn't have to disappear when they do. If the strength a person's stand symbolizes is something that doesn't work for them, their stand doesn't have to treat them differently from other targets. And if the strength a person's stand symbolizes is something that seems to have a mind of its own, their stand can show its own personality and maybe communicate.